Good morning, good evening. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing, we wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. To those of you joining us for today's shows on unions and collectivization, we welcome you in. First, a quick shout out to our sponsors. If you do anything with writing, editing, text in general, and you need help, I know the people to call. At Affinity WES, that's at Affinity Writing and Editing Services. Available on Facebook, available on Twitter. No matter your difficulty, they have the solution. They work with you to make sure your problems go away. On Etsy, Hippie Witch Vibes, that's all one word. Capital H, Hippie, capital W, ITCH, capital VIBES. Hippie Witch Vibes on Etsy. They sell a variety of teas, and they sell all sorts of crystals, paraphernalia, necklaces, whatever you need to get your new age groove on. Hippie Witch Vibes. There's nothing more satisfying than enjoying a little bit of Stardust tea while listening to Silverlight. For those of you interested in contacting the show, we're live on Twitter at Silverlight Live, anytime, anywhere. And if you want to drop us an email, perhaps you don't want to keep your opinions out where they're public, and I absolutely respect people's privacy, silverlightservices@gmail.com. That's all lowercase. So at Silverlight Live on Twitter, and silverlightservices@gmail.com on the email. Let's get right into the show. Since the 1990s, unions have become an evil word. During the 80s, unions were considered all-important. You would use your collective bargaining rights to negotiate. And because of that, they would come up with contracts, they would come up with worker demands. But during the 90s, there was a bit of a recession. And a practice evolved called union busting, where they would hire specialized negotiators. And there were a few negotiators who were very good and established a rather large client base. Excuse me. Those union busters went in, and even the mighty Teamsters had to knuckle under to them, not because they were that powerful, but because they were willing to lock the doors and walk away. And that is the only reason unions get a bad name. Yes, there were corrupt people in unions. It cannot be denied. Yes, unions got complacent. The world evolved around them, and they unfortunately found themselves stuck in the past. The same in any industry, though. I mean, if you're still making wooden furniture, there's a niche market for you, but people are looking for IKEA and Walmart brand particle board furniture. So you haven't moved with the times. Unfortunately, your product is going to become a relic. It's not that you have a worse product. You might have a better one, but you simply can't keep up with the times. Funny story. Just last night, I had to fix a heater. And I opened the back panel, and it turned out it was made not far from me. About 15 kilometers away. Now I know how old that heater is, because that company hasn't been around in about 20 years. Heater's working fine. I need to replace the button. And of course, I had to order the button online. Because I couldn't go to that heating company because they didn't move with the times. As I said before, unions haven't moved with the times. They still think it's the glory days, and while they are better at negotiating than they were, I mean, the union busters came out of nowhere and they're all almost gone now. But people don't trust the unions because they think the unions sold them out, instead of realizing that the unions were stabbed in the back. That's a dangerous phrase to say, and I probably shouldn't use it, but I'm going to use that word on purpose. because it's a misconception. Companies wanted to do anything to bring costs under controls. And the way they did that was by victimizing their workers. I don't want to use specific names here because companies are always trying to cut costs and control everything they can. It's their raison d'etre, the very reason for them being. They want to have low costs for manufacturing or shipping or administration, anything they do. They need to lower the costs. And one big cost is labor. If you've ever watched Kitchen Nightmares or Dinner Impossible or any of those things, the great chefs will all tell you your profit pie basically breaks up into 3 categories. 1/3 goes to get the raw product. 1/3 goes to pay your employees. And out of the remaining third, you have to pay your bills, pay your mortgage, pay everything, and that is your profit. So naturally, they want to juggle those numbers around wherever they can. The cost of the raw product is out of their control. But the third that goes to your wages for your employees, well, that's something. So that's one thing they absolutely can control. And they've gotten very good at controlling it. There's many bars and graphs on the internet that show how worker productivity has increased exponentially since the 1970s, while worker compensation has gone up arithmetically. Which means every time an employee gets a $1 raise, they're doing 4 times as much work. $2 raise would be 8 times as much work. $4 raise would be 16 times as much work. And thanks to the wonders of modern technology, we can do more work. We are doing more work. Thanks to email, it used to be you'd accept 10,000 phone calls in a day. 10,000 is an exaggeration, I apologize. But I worked for a company like that where we had a 30-second window where we expected to listen to the customer, explain the problem, solve the problem, and get a solution out with them. 30 seconds, because our call volumes were so high. Now, in the present day, with emails and everything else, you still do get phone calls, and I don't think we're ever going to get rid of phone calls, because a lot of things can be resolved by email, but humans haven't really evolved to the point of trusting email. So they'll send an email, wait 5 minutes, and then call you on the phone. That's human nature. We see ourselves. We don't see that when we send an email, it's one of 100 that have gone into a queue. Excuse me. Maybe of those 100 emails, 10 are ones that need to be actioned immediately, and there's one person answering them all saying, okay, that needs to be resolved later, I need to research this, or I need to track that right away, whatever the case might be. Companies see work. They have developed statistics to a fine art. They can sit down and say, okay, your coworker, Jane, is taking twice as many phone calls as you. Why is that? And you would have to say, well, Jane and I have an agreement. Jane takes the quick phone calls because she's quick, she's witty, the customers like her, and she sends them away feeling happy. I take the more difficult phone calls because I'm more detail-oriented, and I sit there and I negotiate with the customer, blah, blah, blah. The company will still say, but you need to bring your statistics up. No matter how good of a service you provide, no matter what agreements you have with your coworkers, no matter what your strengths are, they look at metrics. When you get into the big boardrooms, it's all about metrics. This is, sadly, what unions are supposed to be perfect at fighting. There is a union contract for every single union, whether they be Teamsters or the pulp and woodmaker union, which is a real union. Dealt with them. They're not bad people. I like them. With that contract, though, it has clauses that apply to both sides. For example, it will say a worker is protected in these instances, but in these instances the company has control, which is exactly what should be done. And it used to be done that way for many, many years. Most contracts really come down to negotiating pay raise, a little bit of benefits, and if you've already got the benefits, then it's negotiating. We'll give up eyewear, and in return, we're going to get an extra 25 cents an hour. And from what I understand, I don't know, I've never worked this side, but a lot of companies do like to do eyewear on their own, because for them to include that in their insurance apparently is a huge premium, whereas if they simply take the $200 out of their pocket and give it to you every year, 2 years, whatever, it's cheaper. So yeah, there's a lot of little things that need to be negotiated. They can't just put the contract there and say, okay, let's do this, change this number, whatever. They have to go through it clause by clause. But unions and professional associations, which are unions by another name, have the power to negotiate through the power of their members. This becomes important because membership in a union is one of those things that is no longer seen positively. Most people are going to sign up for a union because it's nice to have the benefits. But temporary agencies send workers in on any site. They're not covered by the union, and a union member might take pity on them and go to represent them, but otherwise they're on their own. And you can see you get a two-class system on any working site with the union employees and the non-union employees. That's exactly what the big negotiators and the big companies want. If they can cause division between a workforce, then that makes the workers mutter and talk to each other and complain and argue. Dividing us is the way the big corporations win. Again, I must state corporations are not evil by nature, but they are selfish. They're there to produce a profit. They're not there to benefit their workers. With a little bit of history, that's how unions came about in the first place. Unions were originally equated with socialism because they both kind of erupted around the same time, the late 1800s. Socialism, with Marx and Engels and all the great theorists, was this big, scary ideology. And people were flocking to it because they were sick of being oppressed by royalists and industrialists. I mean, we have no idea how good we have it in the 20th and the 21st century. I will include both, and it is better than it was. At one point, an employer would say, okay, you didn't come into work today, I'm fining you a week's worth of wages. That's right. You missed work. No matter how good your reason is, they would take a week's worth of wages from you. So you're now working a week for nothing. They can withhold pay. There's no law against it. And that's why unions came together. Because the workers realized, hey, they can pick on John over there, then they can come pick on me. But if John and I stand together, we can be united. Union. And indeed, unions were illegal for a very long time. Because the industrialists and the governments were afraid they were socialists. Yes. People fear socialism. It's kind of comical, really, considering that socialism really has never been established anywhere. Oh, sure, there was the USSR, United Soviet Socialist Republics, but they were no more socialist than I am a cat. Just because you call your country something doesn't mean it is. Currently, we have a Democratic Republic of Congo and a Republic of the Congo. We have the People's Democratic Republic of Korea. That sounds good. That must be South Korea. No, that's North Korea. But they claim to be democratic. We know they're autocratic, but just by putting the name in there, it makes it sound better. Names and words have power, a lot of power. Even if it's only to fool yourself, it still gives you power. And by equating unions with socialism, the big corporations and the lobbyists were able to convince big government that it was not in big government's interest to allow people to unionize. Why? Because it's a slippery slope. The next step is communism. The Domino Effect was not coined in the 1960s. That was just its latest incarnation. The idea if one domino falls, Vietnam, then the rest of Southeast Asia will fall. Well, the idea that allowing people to unionize leads to communism is ridiculous. Union workers are some of the hardest workers that I know. The only difference between a union member and a non-union member is the union member realizes that he needs somebody else to back him up, whereas a non-union member thinks they can do it all themselves. And I'm going to tell you, you can't do it yourself. You might be strong. You might be smart. You might be one of the people that has read your company policies left, right, center, forward, backward, etc. But it takes one person and one person only to develop a dislike for you. A union will at least try to give you fair representation. I say try because, again, there's a couple bad unions out there, a couple bad apples no matter where you go. And there's some unions that kick back and really do nothing. That doesn't mean that they're not trying. It means that particular union is a bad one. Just like the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is the example of a not good Korea. Not necessarily bad, but they're not good. Unions get their power from the people. And the people in a union are its strength. It's a mutual relationship because the union is a personification of the people it represents. Now, I'm repeating this 3 ways in slightly different manners because I want to drive the point home that unions represent people. Unions are a collective bargaining front. Collective meaning it is the collective desires of all the people. Union members are supposed to be elected or appointed, or however they get there, they are supposed to be there to represent the workers, the people that are behind them. That's the way it works in theory. So the union has a meeting and they say, okay, our contract is coming up. What does everybody want? More pay will always be the first thing. Okay, what about management has given us this tentative offer sheet where we're going to get 1% this year, but there's a big contract coming in 2 years, so they'll give us 4% then. No, we want 2% this year and 2% next year. Okay, everybody votes. Okay, that has a majority. We'll go back and ask for that. Again, this is purely theoretical, but it's the way unions are supposed to work. And then the union turns around and says, we want 2% per year over 2 years. If you're so sure you have that contract, then you'll be able to afford it easily. The company says, no. Then the union says, fine. We use our collective power to go on strike, to work to rule, to do whatever it is that we know is going to annoy you. Now, major strikes have really gone out of fashion. Work to rule is really the rule these days. Because when you go on strike, workers don't get paid. So going on strike means you are sacrificing whatever it is because you are so passionate in what you believe in. This might work for multi-million-dollar athletes. This might work for screenwriters because they have money stashed away. And the screenwriters go on strike a lot. You notice the actors don't. And the reason that even though they do have a union, professional association, guild, whatever you want to call it, a lot of their own members go under the table to work on independent films because they believe in what the author has to say. They believe in what the person is doing. And because they're not covered by the union, they get paid a different rate. The actors, as the union says, if you are an actor of this standing, you deserve this certain amount of pay per hour. That's pretty much all the agreement covers. That's why I don't particularly like to use them, because it's a very different world. And most people can more relate to a teacher's union, a shop workers union, a mechanics union. That's what most people can relate to instead of multimillionaire athletes. So let's ignore that for a minute. Let's look at teachers. Teachers are often maligned because they have a professional association. But the same token, teachers do a lot of things that you don't see behind the scenes. They get a lot of planning time, and people grouse about that, saying, what do they need planning time? Because they're human beings, and it's never enough. They're spending 6 to 8 hours in the company of kids, and 30 kids in a classroom can do a lot of damage really quickly. They do need an hour to decompress, and they need to set up a lesson plan for tomorrow. If you're a teacher who's been doing it for 20 years, you probably have all sorts of lesson plans set aside, and you can basically rerun last year's lesson plan, and your planning time is spent marking and grading papers. But for a teacher who's been there for less than 10 years, they've got to make up a lot of those lesson plans. Plus, they have to grade all the papers. And that means they are going home with huge, huge, huge amounts of work still to do. Report card time is a nightmare for teachers. I mean, the only thing I can think that comes close are accountants, where when tax season happens, they go through a month of absolute hell. Well, teachers go through about 7-8 months of hell, and then people complain about them having 2 months off. Studies show that when they make teachers work through the summer and students learn through the summer, the students' performance actually drops. There's nothing wrong with having time off. As a matter of fact, the question should not be, why do the teachers get such fantastic benefits? The question should be, why are you not getting those benefits? Again, this is the result of division in our countries, in our economy. We're taught to be jealous of each other. We're taught to be suspicious of each other. We're taught to think everybody's out to get me. And I think we've actually lost the ability to unionize, the ability to work together. Look at social groups like the Lions Club, like even dart leagues and bowling leagues and stuff like that. They're almost extinct. You go to one and you get a whole bunch of fossils gathered around throwing a bowling ball every 5 minutes and congratulating each other. Now, while I don't begrudge anybody having fun, the younger generation is just not interested. Why is that? Because they're so busy. They're running around. They're going to work where it's not just an 8-hour day you go home. Overtime is expected because the company knows they have you over a barrel. You don't have representation. If you had a union, you'd have representation, and you'd have time to go join those dart leagues and bowling leagues and to take care of your kids. But you don't have representation. And you're taught to be jealous of other people's representation rather than saying, hey, we should form a union. And unions are highly discouraged. Oh, if you guys unionize, it's going to cost us more. No, it doesn't. It might cost you a couple bucks off your paycheck, but the first time you're called into the office and a senior union representative is standing there beside you instead of whoever it is that has accused you of whatever offense that you've committed. And I'm sorry, I sound snarky there because a lot of the times in my personal experience, people get called in for discussions. It's absolute BS. The same call center I was talking about where we had 30 seconds per call, the bigwigs came in, shut our whole department down. We were all dragged up to the boardroom. And I always like to make fun of this. The general manager had this eternal frown on his face. It always looked like he was trying to decide whether he had just pooped his pants. And, of course, he led the meeting upstairs. And you know what the problem was? That they would shut down an entire department, take a loss in revenue for however long we were up there, which was about a half an hour. Well, the problem was one of our customers had heard swearing. Now, they investigated before the meeting happened, and the employee, who I happened to sit beside, didn't swear. I didn't swear. My other co-workers didn't swear. But we had an open door policy in our department. And one of our employees, I don't know what happened, whether he was just mouthing off that day, whether he dropped something, whatever it was, he said a few strong words. Natural, maybe you just dropped your wallet, maybe you just dropped your phone, whatever the case is, and he chose a poor selection of words that could be heard over a microphone. Yeah, that's it. We were in trouble because somebody, who could have been anybody from any department, swore in the background. And the customer who complained was sure. They pointed out, yes, it was not the employee who swore. It was somebody in the background. Really? That's worth closing down a department for, to have a meeting about that? That would be, I don't mind if you come in and say, hey everybody, just be aware when somebody's on the phone in here, which happens all the time, that people can hear stuff in the background. So try to take it up. That would be the way a good manager would handle it. Instead, we are all dragged into this closed door meeting and told we had to control this. Well, think about the logistics of that. You're on the phone with a customer, somebody at random swears, and you're supposed to stop with the customer, turn around and say, please don't swear in the office, or whatever you're going to say. Now the customer on the phone is aware of it. This was a chance 1 in a million complaint. And then the comedy that I loved is my frowny faced general manager said, this is just one complaint. Imagine all the complaints that are out there that we haven't heard about. That's called negative logic. You can't infer what doesn't come through. You can only work with what you have. I mean, imagine all the bars of gold all my neighbors are hiding in the garages. Maybe there's one. Maybe there's two. Maybe they all are. I have no data on it, so I cannot make that reference and say, oh, imagine all the bars of gold my neighbors have in their houses. Bet you there's none, but there could be. And if I know about one, that doesn't mean I can infer everybody on the block. That's negative logic, negative reasoning. And that's what management excels at, because everybody becomes a number on a spreadsheet. Oh, your call statistics are this, your resolution statistics are this, blah, blah, blah. You're a number. And you always will be. A union, you're a number to them as well, but you're a number that needs to be represented. Your existence justifies their existence. And most union stewards, union superintendents, union, whatever you want to call them, heads of unions, are very aware of that fact. They only get paid if you get paid. Because if you don't get paid, you can't pay the union dues, and they can't have their meetings with coffee and donuts. On company time, usually. That's another perk that usually gets included. And companies are so afraid of unions. And it's silly. I'm a former manager. I used to work with unions all the time. Unions aren't hard to deal with. But most managers don't want to read the contract. Like I said, companies are smart. They put stuff in the contract to make sure that they will be able to get work done. Almost every single union contract I've read, and I've read a bunch, again, as a manager, because I want to know what I can do and what I can't do. Because there's nothing more embarrassing than coming out and a union steward says to you, no, clause 63 says this, you can't do that. Oh, well, I look stupid at that point. And Silverlight does not like looking stupid. So I had a little copy of the union book with me at all time, and I had the relevant sections highlighted and notated and everything. So when somebody said, I'm going to speak to the union about that, I'd say, okay, clause 61. My company incorporated has the right to assign work the way I see fit. So you have a couple choices. You can go to the union rep, and I'm going to quote this clause, and they won't have a case. Or you can provide me some proof, like a doctor's note or something, that says you are physically incapable of doing that work. In which case, I personally assure you, you will never, ever be assigned that work again, and everybody will know you can't do that job. There's other jobs for you to do. That would always be the way I would say it, although I would not as energetic. I'd make sure my tone was calm, cool, collected. Because when people say, oh, if you can't do that job, they immediately think, oh, you're firing me. You have to be very careful about that point. You never want anybody to feel threatened. Because when they feel threatened, that's a whole situation that you don't want to get into. But that's the power unions have. And it's ignorance on both sides of the divide that prevents them from being effective. Employees that are covered by a union don't want to make waves because this is actually something drilled into us from high school. The teacher keeps notes on who's good in their class and who isn't, and it's entered into a file. The principal knows who the good students are, as the vice principals know, and the teachers talk. It's not so much there's notes in the file, but teachers talk. And we get into this mentality for our entire lives. Now, I've known people that have had 10, 20 jobs, and it's not that they're bad employees. It's just that they keep moving on because they don't want to deal with the fallout. Nothing wrong with that. There's also people who have a lot of jobs because they do a job for a little bit and get bored. When my father retired, he did that. Every year or so he said, I've never done this job before. And he's done some pretty amazing things after he retired. He retired here early for the record because he was a teamster. He managed his money carefully, and he was able to retire young enough, get a full pension, and go on to do other jobs because he busted his butt for years, followed the laws, did what the union told him to do, did what the company told him to do, and that's how he got to retire early. He was never at top of the seniority, but he managed himself well. My mother stayed on a bit longer because she's a bit younger than him, and she wanted to qualify for certain benefits, which you only get after a certain amount of years of service. Just differences in terms. But like I said, I don't think unions are a thing anymore. People are too divided. Look at the last election in the United States. It was chaos on social media. Absolute anarchy. Two sides going at each other, claiming that whoever got elected, they were going to be the end of the world, and yeah. The rhetoric was unbelievable. It's not like the 1980s or the 1990s where Reagan, Bush, and Clinton, yes, there were people who did not like them. And maybe one day I'm going to do a deep dive into the various presidents, both because their biographies are interesting and the conspiracy theories surrounding them are very interesting. But I don't think people can unify anymore. I always joke that if I put a picture of a rock on the internet, there would be somebody who would offer a fully valid reason why they don't like that rock. And they would stand rock solid and tell you why that rock was the worst rock in the world. Just a rock. We can't leave it alone. People want their opinions to be heard. But they don't want to use a tool like a union to let their opinions be heard. They want to sit there and have their shouting match and let their opinion be known. There's a lot of good examples of communities that have a great deal of unity in them. For untold centuries, monasteries have done it. Not just Christian monasteries, but Buddhist and whatever the Islamic version of a monastery is. I know they exist, I just don't know the word for them at the present time. But the point is, you get a group of people who are able to set aside their differences for the most part and work towards a common goal. Something we can't do today. Why is it that we can no longer do that? We have just as much diversity as ever. I mean, we can argue this back and forth. I'm sure some of you will be typing in the comments about how we're more diverse today than we were, and it was only as a result of a homogenous society, blah, blah, blah. And you wouldn't be entirely wrong. I would partially agree with you. But I would also say that the monks and the priests of old times would welcome other people in. The law of hospitality was all-powerful, and not being hospitable and welcoming people in was a grave sin. You weren't supposed to do it because it would reflect on your charity. And charity, of course, was a godly act. It was a virtue, not a sin. The idea of charity, again, has been thrown out the window along with the idea of coming together and working together. In the 1920s and the early 1930s, well, probably the 1910s as well, people would come together for what was called a mass strike. And in that case, it wouldn't just be the bus drivers going on strike. It wouldn't just be the truck drivers going on strike. It would be a whole city going on strike at once to let the government and the employers know they weren't going to take it. No, they weren't going to take it. They're not going to take it anymore. It would almost be impossible to organize that these days. Yes, there was Occupy Wall Street. There was, what was the other thing? Sorry, that's my fault. Memory's getting a little funny now that I'm getting older. But those movements were never really about a mass strike. It was an attempt at a mass strike, but they petered out because we are divided as a society. But the general strikes back in the day were honestly devastating. Not only could you not go out and buy milk and do anything, you would be swept up by the masses all saying, we want unions legalized, we want fairer wages, we want lower prices on milk, whatever it is. And they would all go out, well, not all of them, obviously there'd be some holdouts, but there was more unity. They knew it was them as a unit against the corporations and the government. Nowadays, people don't trust the government. For some crazy reason, they think the corporations, these big multinational conglomerates, are on their side. They think big business is going to give them money and give them jobs. But they forgot. Remember how I started this episode? The rule of thirds. These big conglomerates can control the price of what they buy because they have such purchasing power. They can control their price of labor because they have it in their pockets and in their debt to be able to turn around and say, we're putting in a new computer system that handles work 10 times better, so we need 10% less workers, and that's how we're going to justify spending this money. So their third portion of profit becomes a lot bigger because they've controlled the first two costs. Again, when it comes to any corporation, and I don't care whether you're a big dog, a small dog, little dog in a big pond, guess what? You're just a number. And no matter how good you are, unless somebody's on your side, your numbers are what they go by. Very stark difference. In the 1960s, people would come together for communes, where they would put together communal effort. And in the 1960s, it was mostly farming. And they would build little farming communities. And generally, they did okay. In the 1940s, the people of Israel put together kibbutzes, which were half farms, half defense institutions. even child rearing was done collectively. If you'd have a child, you'd have it at home for the nursing, then they go into the communal area where the teachers who specialize in that role would take care of them and raise them to adults. Communes were more in the hippie love vibe kind of thing, where everybody shared equally and you worked equally, and it was the community that put the pressure on people to not slack and to do work. There are still a few communes, there's still a few kibbutzes, and they're doing pretty well. But I've been wondering for over a decade how hard it would be to actually establish a modern commune. Obviously, you can't follow the farming model. I'm looking around me. There's not a lot of people who would know what to do with a farm. Gardeners, yes, they understand the basics, but most people who've been living in their life with internet hot showers and, power available at the flip of a button are not going to be able to go out and build a solar generator and start manufacturing whatever. Tomatoes, taking care of goats, or even killing their own meat. And I really don't think putting a vegan commune together would be successful. Not because there's anything wrong with vegans, but just because it would be difficult to get that many like-minded vegans together. Instead, my idea was to offer a service in this commune. I was splitting my idea between something like a hotel, where you allowed the people to stay in one section free, and in return they maintained a beautiful resort. So I don't know, let's pretend for a second it's a golf and leisure resort. So a family would come, they would have their tea times booked, there would be a lifeguard at the pool so they could drop the children off, and that would be how the community would make their money. One of my concepts. Another concept that I kind of got from watching documentaries on Japan was I was looking at those Japanese pod hotels. Now, I don't think I'd go so far as to put somebody in a coffin overnight, but I could definitely see something in the vein of the tiny houses where you have your own living space and it's also your working space. And there'd be communal areas where you can get together because I don't want people working 24 hours a day. And basically, you try to get the software nerds, the introverts together. Not the IT people that go out on calls and stuff, but those really brilliant software people who don't want the contact. They just want to code. And you would build your company based on that. You'd make your money, you'd buy your food, everybody would have their meals delivered to their cubicle, and of course you'd have to have salesmen of some sort. I'm sure you can work that in. Both sound like pretty good ideas. The problem is the initial investment. Whether you're buying this resort or whether you're buying this cubicle farm, it's still a lot of money going in, which means you have to have people buying into your idea, and you have to be able to produce in a very competitive marketplace. Plus, all those people together, they're going to wind up as divided as everybody else. We taught people to stand up for themselves, which is good. But we forgot to teach them to stand together with their allies. This is something the most primitive tribes understand. You go into Brazil, you find an uncontacted tribe that has not been seen since the Stone Age, and they're still running around with nothing. They still know who their friends are and who their enemies are. Which territories they can go into, which territories they can't. Who they can depend on to trade with, and who steals from them. So humanity, at its basest existence, is still better off knowing who is doing what than we are in the 21st century, 2021, with the internet, with telecommunications, with pizza being delivered to our front door by horribly underpaid workers who are not unionized and depend on those tips just so they can pay for their gas. See, I'm kind of on everybody's side here. Interesting note on pizza delivery. Domino's claims that they don't make any money off pizza delivery. Yes, they make money off the sale, but they said they don't understand how places like Uber Eats and Skip the Dishes and DoorDash, places like that, they don't understand how they can make money. And Domino's has been doing pizza delivery for decades. How can they not be making money and these third-party applications be making money? I'll tell you how. By removing agency from their drivers. The drivers for those various places are completely isolated from one another. There's no Uber union. There's no Skip the Dishes professional union. They're just people with a car and a screen in their car that says, okay, Mrs. Rogers wants 3 orders of Kung Pao chicken, and, it's been paid for by Visa, leave it at the front door, whatever the instructions are. Then they look at it, and I know from ordering in the past, I have done it once or twice, I'm not a rich man, but the same token, once in a while, a treat is okay. The tip option is available right away. So, you are given 5%, 10%, and 15%, I believe. Or 0%. About a year and a half ago, before the pandemic, I would always fill out $0 tip because I would give them the tip in cash. And now you can't do it because they want to do the no contact delivery, which I can respect. I mean, I had a technician in the house the other day and I was telling him, you want to put on your booties on your boots. Oh, I won't dirty your floor. No, I'm not worried about you dirtying my floor. It's just my sewer pipes went and I didn't want his boots to get that sewer water on them. So that was why I was telling him that. Problem solved. Everything's clean. I'm not living in a sewer, but yeah, it's a little nothing, but he didn't know about that walking into the place, and he's a sewer specialist. Imagine what a food delivery person goes through. And these food delivery people, their wages are being cut. The software system that matches you has another level too. You see, not only is it looking for the nearest driver, it's also looking for the best driver. So if you keep refusing deliveries, it shuffles you to the back of the line. It says, well, we can't give this to Bob because Bob refuses anything that's not a 15% tip. Whereas Barry takes almost everything, so they offer it to Barry first. And Barry winds up tearing his hair out, trying to run all over the city and figure out how he's going to make all these deliveries, while Bob is sitting there going, I'm doing nothing. No transportation company in the world does this. You use your drivers equally because you have to. There's no other way to make it work. Well, these third-party delivery places that don't have any oversight, they can do what they want. And it's difficult for drivers even to compare with each other. Imagine how good a union would be. They could look over the pay stubs, hours worked, etc., and they could say, hey, why is Bob only making $10 an hour, whereas Barry is making $30 an hour, but Barry's fuel bill is $400 for the month, while Bob is only $10. Unions are the ones that can use the numbers against the corporations. Co-ops and communes aren't looking at the numbers, they're looking at the people. They know Bob wants the bigger tip. Although, I don't know about the commune and tipping, but let's just roll with my old example. So, whoever was in charge in the commune would be able to assign the labor to make sure everybody was working equally, instead of one guy going crazy making all the money, the other guy sitting around doing nothing. Unions need to be modernized. They need to come into the 21st century. They were very effective in the early days. When they were legalized, they were incredibly effective at negotiating because the owners hadn't realized how much powers their workers had anymore. But we've lost that sense of community power. We've lost that sense of community. I mean, the 45th President of the United States has divided us so badly. We were already divided, but during his tenure it got dramatically worse, and I don't see us coming back for it for quite some time. But he was a traditional businessman. Divide and conquer. If you can make them fight each other, you can do pretty much whatever you want. Sound business strategy, not a sound leadership strategy. As a leader, you have to realize you have a goal and you have to accomplish it. So that goal is that the company makes money so that they can pay you money, in theory. I've always made the joke of my objective is to make my boss rich. And they always say, why? And I said, because when I ask you for a raise, you'll be feeling you'll have money in your pocket. You'll say, yeah, sure, I can give Silverlight a raise. Whereas if you're not doing so well and I ask for a raise, you're not going to be quite so generous. Whereas a union, instead of me going into the boss and saying, please, sir, can I have some more? Like Oliver Twist, looking for a little bit of extra porridge. A union can come together and say, you are giving us this, or you lose your production for this week. Well, if you could even get a union to agree on that nowadays and be able to keep temporary workers off. And by the way, my opinion of temporary workers is probably worth a show of its own, but I really think temporary workers need to be restricted badly. I have no problem with temporary workers for maternity leave, medical leave. If there's a documented reason, yes, that's a good reason to hire a temporary worker. I like that. If you have a sudden low-skilled job influx, I understand hiring a temporary worker. Like, normally you move 400 bags of heavy stuff in a day, and for the next 3 weeks you're going to be getting 600 bags in a day because there's a production explosion. It's selling like hotcakes. I understand that. But all too often I see companies filling their roster with temporary people. And they're always told, oh, this is temporary to permanent. And that never happens. It's temporary forever. I knew a guy who was a temporary for 4 years. And the only reason I don't know what happened to it after that is I left the company. I'm pretty sure if I called him now, he's still a temporary, and damn it, he's a darn good employee. Kashmir, if you're listening out there, baby, still love you. You're still the best damn driver I know that's a temporary. You'd be a fine addition to any company. But I know Kashmir is probably not listening. No matter. It's a tragic point that Kashmir, like I said, was one of the best employees for the company, and they wouldn't bring him on full time. The union was there, and they weren't fighting for the temporary workers. Even though it would have given them more members, they didn't want to fight for them because the temporary agency told them not to do it. And you get into this whole big idea of ownership of your rights. So when you work for a temporary agency, they own your rights. You're not working for company ABC, you're working for temporary agency XYZ. And they are farming you out, they're sitting back, they're collecting money off your hard-earned dollars. So tell me, no matter how divided you are, no matter whether you disagree with me or not, wouldn't you rather have some agency in your decision, whether it be just through a union person that you helped elect, rather than trying to represent yourself and know that the company is looking at you saying, he didn't do so well today, we'll give him tomorrow and then we're going to get rid of him. Those are the choices. Humanity, especially in the weird countries, the Western, educated, industrialized, rich and democratic nations, we have to start remembering our power. When we come together and we unite, they can't come against us. They have to think. Yes, you can have a Tiananmen Square idea where they send the tanks in, but that was horrible for the Chinese government. And to this day, they claim the general went rogue, they never gave the order. They're still covering their tail to this very day. The government doesn't want to take a mass population on. That's why they jump on people like Waco, because they're afraid they're going to come and rise together. And all governments fear one thing: losing power. Whether by being voted out in the next election, whether by being thrown out, like Louis was in France, and many other monarchs have been over the years. The governments don't forget what it's like to lose power. The corporations do their job and they make money. So for you and I, the only option left is to come together. Maybe we have to come up with a new definition of a union. But we've lost our collective bargaining power because we are not a collective. No one's looking out for us right now. We're all looking out for ourselves. And every country has treaties. Every country has allies. Tribes have allies and friends and everything. Here in the Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic nations, our alliances are very fragile, to say the least. Half of you don't like your next door neighbors. Half of you don't like your superintendent or your homeowners association or your boss. You know which one you are. And you can't really do much about it unless you organize and you come together and you show you can cooperate and become one distinct, powerful entity. Yes, the government can send in bombers. Yes, the government can send in tanks. But they don't want to unless they get desperate. So if we can come back to that spirit where we come together and make a decision final for us, that we will take nothing less than this level of justice and fairness. Until that, we're going to get whatever scraps the corporations and government throw us off their plates. And my friends, that situation is unacceptable, and it's only getting worse by the day. Wish to thank you for joining us for the Silverlight show today. It's a difficult topic, one that I'm sure raises many emotions, and I look forward to hearing from anybody who has an opinion. On Twitter, it's @Silverlight Live. That's @Silverlight Live, all one word, lowercase. By email, you can send an email to silverlightservices@gmail.com. That's silverlightservices@gmail.com. Again, all lowercase. If you support the show, there'll be a link to our books in the description. I'm working on quite a few projects right at the moment. There's going to be an explosion in around April and May of books coming out. And I'm very much looking forward to that. But I also look forward to talking to everybody every week. And I enjoy every person that listens, every person that likes, and every person that subscribes. By the way, those YouTube channels that say they get 3-4 times as many views as they do subscribers, they're all right. They are all correct. I'm not asking for subscribers. I'm just telling you, hey, you know what? They're not whistling Dixie. That isn't a trap. That is the truth. I have about 4 times as many viewers as I have subscribers. And you know what? That is your choice. I always try to make it so that your choice is valid. But I'm saying, you know what? When I heard it, I was skeptical. And now that I've had a real chance to sit back and look at the data over the past couple of months, hey, it's true. But no matter what, do what you know is right, and we always treasure you tuning in to listen. Thank you very much for tuning in, and for everybody, we hope you have a good day.